everybody. So just to reiterate, welcome everybody to our September Spirit-Space gathering. Today we're going to be talking about the psychic detective, and I am joined by the illustrious Harry Boyd from the Virginia Police Department. So we're going to be, who is one of those very rare folks who is both law enforcement and open to ESP and using psychics, the resources that psychics bring to the table to solve crimes. So as I mentioned, we're going to chat for about 25 minutes. We'll do Q&A for about 15 minutes if you guys have any questions, and then we'll do our little practice of key practices in psychic detection, which is determining if somebody is alive or dead and starting to get some profiling information going. So we'll do those very simple but hopefully fun exercises for you to do at the end of the group today. All right. So also, I'm going to have, I have a special offer for all participants in this group today. So please don't somebody forget to make sure I tell you what that is, because I have a little discount and little gifts for you for today for our Spirit Space community. Right. So shall we get started? So you all know who I am. Harry, do you want to say hello and introduce yourself and a bit about your background to the group?
Sure. Hi, Karen. And hello, everybody. This is a great honor for me to be here. My name's Harry Boyd. I am a retired police officer. I began my career in law enforcement in 1974 with the Virginia Commonwealth University Campus Police. And then I moved to an agency known as the Henrico County Police, which is a suburb of the city of Richmond, Virginia, which is the capital of Virginia. And the Henrico Police has approximately some 700 officers, so it's a fairly large agency. And I was there for 30 years, and I have since retired, and I am now the emergency manager at the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts, which is one of the largest museums in the country. So it's a great pleasure for me to be able to sort of transition into that role.
Beautiful. Thanks, Harry. So as I mentioned, Harry is one of those very rare creatures who's both skilled at actual detecting and also open to psychic detection. So we'll share a few stories as we go this morning. So the first thing I wanted to point out is that psychic detection in the real world is real stuff. It's not the stuff of reality TV, because we get this idea that psychics just waltz into crime scenes and receive all of this information and social security number, address, last known whereabouts of the criminal and everything else. And that's actually not really the case. It actually requires really honing and developing your own natural psychic ability or a natural ESP ability, and actually honing it in ways that where we can actually relate to law enforcement. You almost need to think about it. Sorry, Harry, law enforcement speaks a different language to us, and we need to be able to work with our own ESP and psychic abilities to be able to go and be relatable to them. So a few things we want to be able to do with psychic detection. Normally, if you are, and I do have in the course, but also there are some organizations that do actually work with teams of psychics. So Find Me is one I used to work with, and Find Me is an organization that helps law enforcement find missing persons. And what they do is they have a pool of psychics who are trained in psychic detection, and what they will do is they will send out photographs of somebody who's missing, or somebody, initially in situations like this, the person can be missing. They don't know if they're alive or dead. And so that becomes a key first step in psychic detection. And the part of the reason for that is that law enforcement have limited resources to go searching for all the missing people you can imagine all over the country. And so if somebody is presumed alive, they will have what's called, it'll be a rescue mission. And so there's a lot more resources allocated to that search. Now, if the person is presumed dead, it gets demoted to a recovery operation, and very, very fewer resources are available for that. They'll have to get reassigned. So part of our job, if we start wanting to work with this work, is being able to work with the photographs that you receive. And the very first thing is able to determine from the photograph the person's alive or dead, because that's really going to greatly affect law enforcement. And so for a company, say like Find Me, and there are others, and there are some in Europe as well, but for a company like Find Me, you'll get the name, the last known whereabouts, and the photograph, and that's what you start working with. And then from that, you will make that determination. Then you can attune to it and get a sense of where might that person be. And this is where a lot of things like remote viewing skills, using Google Maps, which is a great tool these days, to start finding landmarks, finding them on maps, starting to narrow that search to like 200 miles to 100 miles to 20 miles, to start finding a place that person might be. That becomes extremely helpful to law enforcement as well, as you can imagine. So all the time, we want to make sure, as we're working with or using our ESP, we're coming up and we're thinking in terms of also, what is actionable information? What can I walk into a police department with, or what can I walk into an organization with and offer them that could be helpful? You know, sort of going in and sort of saying, oh, I saw this missing person on the news and I feel like she's in water somewhere, was really not going to help the local precinct, you know, when they've got, you know, what have they got to search? So a very quick example, and some of you have heard me say this before, probably, well, I know Harry has. So I was working with Find Me on a Missing Person. They sent me this photograph of this elderly lady, and her last known whereabouts was, I'm going to change the names because this is a tiny little area that identified. So I don't want it going out into the world that there was a murdered person in this tiny little area. So I'll change the names, but just say outside Phoenix, Arizona. She was last seen in an area, Phoenix, Arizona, sent the photograph. I sat with it and came up with, and I heard very, very clearly a word of a very unusual name of an area just outside the city. I'll just, for the sake of the story, call it Glasgow. And when I Google mapped it, I actually found there was a little tiny area just outside Phoenix called Glasgow, only 18 houses in it. The actual name of the town was even more obscure than that, but there was only 18 houses in this little horseshoe. So I got on to the Find Me coordinator and I said, I do believe this woman is in one of those 18 houses. I mean, we're talking about the whole of southern Arizona, and this is where it was located too. And it turned out that this little horseshoe of houses was 2.5 miles from her last known whereabouts, which I only realized when I looked on Google Maps. So I went to it and I said, I do believe she's in this little horseshoe of 18 houses. Do you know what they said? Which one? So it'll give you an idea of how specific law enforcement. I'm like, can you not just go knock on 18 doors? No. So it'll give you an idea of why we need to really, really train and hone our skills to be able to effectively work with law enforcement. What often happens, though, as well, is that these cases go cold. So this happens quite a lot, and Harry can talk about that too, where you can get the photograph one day and you can really feel the energy of the photograph. This person's definitely alive. You can attune, you can use your remote viewing, you can use your Google Maps and your other resources and get a pinpoint where the person is. 3 days later, you can look at the photograph and it feels very different. Anyone know why? That would be, you can pop it in the chat if you do. Where's my chat gone? Yes, absolutely, Bergen, because the person in the 3 days is no longer alive. The first 48 hours are crucial, and that's why we need to really have, everyone's going to, that's why we really need to hone our abilities and be very, very focused about this, you know. And so this is just the beginning of the search. And, you know, the other things we can do is start working with, you know, photographs. Do you feel like this person's guilty or innocent? We can start profiling. That's where you can use more and more of your psychic abilities to actually start, you know, reading the person's aura, reading everything about them, that photograph, and start coming up with a profile of maybe what they did or didn't do or what's capable of. And so anything that you can come up with that is actionable can be immensely helpful to law enforcement. So I do also just want to note that law enforcement, another reason why we need to be very good and very reflective and take this work very seriously, is that people's real lives are on the line here, you know. And so this is not just what you're sitting around to do a nice psychic reading for something. This is really important work. Sometimes what happens is that cases go, a lot of the time cases can go cold and they can drag on for years, you know, before they're eventually solved. So when you see it on TV of people just walking in and finding the perpetrator and solving the crime immediately, that's the stuff of TV. In the real world, it can take years. And even if they catch the perpetrator, it can take years before it goes to trial, before all the evidence is known, you know. And so we just are a small part of what is actually really important work. Because especially with, say, cold cases, or cases where, you know, the police department just can't find the evidence they need to pin it, or to make the crime stick, you can actually often just come up with that one little thing that then law enforcement can go and investigate, and that could be the clincher. And for families who have not gotten any answers, this work, finding that resolution or helping to find a resolution for those families. So you can imagine if one of your loved ones has just gone missing and never found again, how much would you give for somebody just to come along with one clue that just could be the thing that gives you the answers that you need? It's such important work, and it's real life, real world work as well, which makes it very, very important. So, Harry, do you want to add anything? I know just one thing before I introduce Harry. The law enforcement are required by law to follow up on all leads, right? So if you walk in and you say, oh, I had a vision of somebody under a bridge, under a river somewhere, they are required to follow up on that. So we really need to give them specific information, because otherwise they're just going to be like, God, like, what are they supposed to do with this? They're just going to end up hating psychics, you know. So it's our ethical responsibility to be as detailed as possible, to walk in with as much actionable information as possible so that they can do something about it. So just bear in mind, they have to follow up on what you walk in the door with. They have to follow up on what everybody walks in the door with. So please, if you're thinking of doing this work, try to think in terms of what can they do with this piece of information. All right? Can they actually actively do something? It's always a good thing to bear in mind as we go forward. So Harry, we did have a couple of questions. One was, you know, how responsive or how often do law enforcement work with psychics? Now, we both know that they work with them more often than they'll admit to, but do you want to share anything on that with our group today?
Well, sure. And, you know, I see some familiar faces in here, so that's really nice. So nice to see folks I actually recognize. Yeah, I mean, there's sort of a change in the law enforcement culture, you know, there's a whole new generation of law enforcement officers that are coming up, and these ladies and gentlemen are coming up having been exposed to YouTube and Netflix and all of the ghost hunting television shows and all of the YouTube psychic programming. And so it's become far more acceptable now to actually give credence to some of these things that before would have just been laughed at, and no one would ever even have mentioned that they talked to someone who thought that they had psychic information. Yeah, but you're right, Karen. Yeah, we did work with them on a sort of clandestine basis. If we got information, we would certainly follow up on that, but rarely would we have made that known to our superiors or even to other officers. If you felt someone had some credible information, you do that rather quietly and hope you were able to take that someplace else.
And that's a good point, because you know, you can as a psychic walk in and say, you know, like, the person's in number 6 in this little house of 18 people. That in and of itself is not going to be admissible in court. But if they can go and investigate that themselves and get concrete, tangible evidence of that, then that's admissible. So we're not trying to go, you know, stand up in court and expect a defense lawyer or a prosecutor to say, oh, well, a psychic said. But what you can do is provide the information that then they can go investigate and validate. And then that becomes admissible. So it becomes important work. But Harry, haven't you had some psychic impressions or psychic details that you've received yourself on when you were in the police force?
Yes, quite a bit, actually. I'll share one here. This was pretty much like the very first time. I had always been aware of psychic, you know, phenomena and was very interested in it. My mom was psychic, and so I grew up with this kind of thing, but I never really paid much attention to it for myself. So I had gone into the police academy, and I had gone through, and I had graduated, and I was out doing my patrol function. And one Friday night, we got a call. A lady came home and found that her house had been broken into. Her back door had been kicked in. So she went next door, called 911. Another officer and myself got the call. We go check the house. It was a 2-story house. We checked everything. Didn't find anybody. came back down. We were talking to this lady downstairs about, you know, anything taken, what time did you leave, all those basics that you do for the police report. So as we're talking to this lady, I just got this little hit. It's like, you know, there was almost like a little voice. It was like, you need to go check upstairs. And I'm like, I'm sorry, who? I have already checked upstairs. So I just sort of blew it off, paid no attention to it. And then a couple minutes later, this little voice came back and goes, you really need to go check upstairs. And at this point, I'm like, I don't know what all this is about, but no one else is hearing it. So I'll just wander back upstairs. So I went back upstairs while my friend John was talking to the victim. And so the only place I had not looked in this lady's upstairs was under her bed. Now, you know, in the first place, what self-respecting criminal is actually going to hide under a bed? I mean, where else would one hide? I mean, there's got to be a better place to hide under the bed. And if it was like my house, you can't get under the bed anyway. There's too much junk stuffed up under there. So, you know, I said, well, okay, nowhere else. So I dropped down on all fours and pulled up the bedspread, and there, staring me in the face, like 6 inches away, was a gentleman with a butcher knife. And so I did the first thing that every trained law enforcement officer should do, and that was I screamed. It was like, ah. And of course, that scared him. I scared him as much as he scared me. So he screamed. So we got this scream fest going back on there. A guy with a gun and a guy with a butcher knife screaming at each other, you know, 6 inches away, 6 inches away. So anyway, long story short, I ended up jumping up on top of the bed with my gun out. And then I'm thinking, okay, let's see, well, the mattress is about this wide and the knife is this long. So if he starts this, that could be a problem. So I ended up bouncing across the room, calling, you know, John, he's under the bed. My friend John came. He was a weightlifter. He was a huge fellow. So he just reached down, took the bed, picked it up, and we pulled this gentleman out, took the knife away from him, and I arrested him. But you know, he was a very nice gentleman. His name was Jeffrey. I'll never forget Jeffrey. That was my first foray into the world of psychic detection. So Jeffrey did me a favor, I suppose. But whoever was that little intuition, that little blurb that says you really need to go back upstairs and check this thing out, you know, because the very least thing that would have happened. I mean, if we had left Jeffrey in the house with his knife, there's no telling what he could have done. I mean, he could have anything. And so the very least that would have happened if the lady had found him after we left was that I would have been fired. So it was you know, it was a win-win for everybody. But I didn't tell anybody that somewhere from the other side, somebody told me to go back upstairs and find Jeffrey under the bed with his butcher knife. But there were other things that came with that. It's a very sort of intuitive thing for me. I mean, I could go into a room with a number of people and pretty much pick out who was going to be the problem, or who I needed to go talk to about a certain thing. So it developed as I actually paid more attention to that as I went along. You know, trust is a big factor in that. My big problem was trusting what you get, rather than go, well, I made that up, or I saw that on TV last week, or, you know, all that kind of thing that people are, you know, really skeptics are very eager to throw into the mix. But when you can actually trust what you get, it's you know, it's a very good thing.
Yeah, and it's a good point, because it's something that everybody in the room can probably attest to that. It's something that everybody, when you're developing ESP or psychic detection or doing mediumship or any of these in this world, is that doubt is a very key thing to get over. Is it me, or is it whatever, is a very key thing. So everybody faces that, and it does take really, you know, the only easy way around that is just experience. Sometimes you just have to choose to trust, you know, because you can talk yourself out of anything. But if you just choose to trust, and so what? So what have you felt? I mean, in Harry's case, so what if he went up and looked under the bed and the guy wasn't there? So what? Followed the intuition and it was right? So we want to be able to obviously don't want to be walking into houses with potential murderers with knives and hiding under the bed yourselves. But for the police department, that's all fine, you know. I'm going to just open it up to some questions. So if any of you have any questions for myself or Harry about this work, if you want to start popping them into, if you could just pop them into everyone in meetings so everyone can see the questions, that will be handy, in case I miss any. So yeah, so you can probably see, I mean, remote viewing, a really good movie that I recommend to everybody to watch who's interested in this work is Men Who Stare at Goats. because that is a movie about remote viewing. That's about the CIA Stargate program. And remote viewing is a key part of psychic detection, because what we want to be able to do is develop those remote viewing skills so that you can basically essentially psychically walk the crime scene. So you can see landmarks, you can see what's going on, you can see things around that can help identify. You might see a crime scene, and you may say, for example, see a cigarette butt somewhere that was missed. That could be a key part of the investigation. So the more we can actually learn how to walk crime scenes with our remote viewing abilities, the better. So there's loads and loads of skills that you can actually hone to really support this work and to be very, very effective in it. You know, so you're not just wandering into a police station with a notion that they can't really take any action on. So that's a very important thing. A couple of things I do want to say is that when we're working with this, I mean, most of you will probably know you've walked into a building and you just had an uneasy feeling about it, right? Or you've met a group of people, like Carrie was saying, you just meet somebody and you have an uneasy feeling about them. That's all your clairsentience, that's all psychic abilities, all your intuition telling you something has happened here. Now, most of you know I'm the most practical medium on the planet, and so I do not believe in hauntings by any stretch of the imagination. I also have a doctorate in ghost stories, so I've done extensive research on this. If you walk, see anybody in New York, we had somebody else here from New York as well. There's a whole bunch of warehouses downtown where there used to be sweatshops. And back in the 1800s, early 1900s, there were fires in these. There was loads of young ladies were burned. There was stories of people jumping out the windows. Well, a lot of those sweatshops now have been, you know, revamped, and now a lot of them, you walk into them, they're really, really high tech places, you know. But when you walk into them, you can still feel something. You can still feel something in the energy, and what that is not a bunch of spirits. What it is, it's the imprint of the energy. So the imprint of spaces where things happen, the imprint of that energy can linger. So you could walk onto it, if you walked physically onto a crime scene, if you've been developing your clairsentience and if you're learning to trust, choosing to trust your intuition, you will just feel that. I'm sure lots of you have felt that, right? You know, you just have that feeling about somebody or some place. So this is a key part of this work as well. It's just that awareness of the world around us, you know, that we can bring all of that to the work, that this type of work. One thing I want to be very, very clear about, that when we're doing this work, it is not mediumship, it is psychic, which means we are working with the energy in the physical plane, the energy that's lingering in the physical plane, right? If you are wanting to use mediumship to help solve crimes, you need to, the only way mediumship works is if you're sitting in front of the family or the loved ones related to the person who say has been murdered, which I've often happened in mediumship sittings, because you have to have the connection between them and them to make that possible to receive the information, right? Otherwise, we'd all be having chats with Marilyn Monroe and Elvis Presley on a daily basis, right? So this is psychic work, which means that we can, without any contact with the family, without any contact with anybody, can walk onto a crime scene, can remote view a crime scene, can start to identify whether a person's missing or if they're alive or dead or where they are. We can start profiling just from your clairsentient ability, your clairvoyant ability, all of your ESP, a profile around a suspected perpetrator. So all the time we are working here. We're not working with the spirit world, because people often come to this and go, oh, but I don't want a murdered person communicating with me. Well, I'm sorry to tell you, they're not going to. So you don't really need to worry about that, except for my neighbor downstairs who was shot dead one night and woke me up at 2:00 in the morning. But he was my neighbor, so I had a connection to him. So that was different, right? And they took him away anyway. So, right, questions. Let's see. Where have we got? Are the UK police is open, or do they work with psychics too? They do. I know Tony Stockwell has done quite a lot of psychic work, and also Simon James, who's now in Canada. For those Canadians, there he's in I think over in the West Coast. Is that Vancouver? So they have done quite a lot of work with being called in. Sometimes what will happen is it's not just you seeing something on the news and getting an impression or getting some information or choosing to do the work yourself and walking down into the precinct with it, or working with a team like the Find Me team. Sometimes a family, if they know you or if they know that you have this ability, a family may come to you and ask for your help. And so that often happens with Simon James up in Canada. I know he has families coming to, yes, Simon, Victoria Island off Vancouver, thank you. So they will have families come, sometimes that happens as well. I know in England, there are a number of psychics that do work with law enforcement, but it's the same as pretty much the US, is that, you know, you really, if you want to do this work, the ideal thing to do is to find somebody like Harry who is in some way open to it, who you can actually have an open line of communication with, rather than just walking into the desk sergeant and saying, hey, I've had a vision, right? And so, you know, it's good if you can cultivate, if you're interested in this work, to cultivate those sorts of relationships if you can. Joining a group like the Find Me group is always a good idea as well. And you do actually have to take their assessment to see if you can. But this is all stuff, if you've got psychic ability and you're developing your ESP, the skills you need to sit one of those tests to be part of that group is fairly straightforward. So I would say, yes, in the UK, there are open, but, you know, whether they admit to it or not is an entirely different thing. Generally tend to not, for obvious reasons. You know, obviously, you don't want to be going in as the prosecutor and the defense getting wind that some of your information came from a psychic, because you know what's going to happen in the courtroom with that. So we always want to be remembering that we want to be offering tangible information that law enforcement can then just use as a tip. And then, like any tip, and go and investigate and get actionable evidence from it, which is a very, very key part of the work here. Do they take individual psychics seriously when they come up with unsolicited information? I will tell you, the precinct really doesn't like people just wandering in, you know, with just half-baked idea. But if you have a couple of things you need to be careful of, and this is why working with a group or cultivating an open channel of communication with an individual law enforcement officer, is that if you walk in with something very key, very tangible, and you walk into the precinct and you say, this person is dead and their body is at this address, if it was that specific, they will, of course, take it seriously. As I said earlier, law enforcement have to take every single tip seriously. They are required by law to do that, right? Which is why we want to be as specific as you can. But you've got to be careful also, which is why working with a liaison in a group is the better idea. You don't want to walk in with some tangible information of reporting where the body's found and then all of a sudden becoming a suspect, right?
And that is a very real possibility. Anybody that comes in with specific information, especially on a case that is brand new, or still under investigation, you're immediately going to become a suspect.
Absolutely, yeah. So this is why being part of a team, or, you know, getting to know somebody in the police department, or just sort of, you know, having a little noodle around and developing those relationships would be a better thing to do than just walking into the desk sergeant, to be honest. You know, calling 911, they'll be like, oh goodness, we've got 68 people ahead of you with emergencies. Do you know what I mean? So we always have to think in terms of the resources as well, because it's very much real world stuff. So Jennifer's saying she remembers hearing that police don't have special intuition, that police that don't have special intuition have a sense of what could be a problem. Yeah. You know, so it is again, it becomes, you know, you find this with the police department, especially after years and years and years of doing this, there is what they will call an instinct. And what is an instinct? It's an intuition. You know, it's just an intuition that is also based on knowing and experience. So, so Leah, I just answered that question. Okay. What's the best way to cooperate with the police? So I think the best way to cooperate with the police is the way I said, is to find a group like Find Me. That's the one that's here in the States, over in the West Coast. I believe there's one. I believe there's a group that works with Interpol. I'd have to do some research. You could probably Google that yourself. But definitely think in terms of, you need to have great specificity to be helpful, but you also need to make sure you deliver that to somebody who's not going to think you're a suspect, right? So we want to be able to really develop those relationships to be able to do the work as well. So a website is I think it's findme.org. I have it in the psychic detection course, the link for that as well. You do actually have to take an assessment. So you would need to be able to do things like profile, identify live or dead, do some remote viewing to be able to go to one of these agencies. But you could try Find Me, and then you could Google around. There is a couple, but there's not a lot. I think the guy who founded Find Me, I think he was a retired FBI agent anyway, at least the person who ran it when I worked for them did. Do psychic detectives have any actual training for portions of the force? Trish, I'm not exactly sure what you mean. Do they actually, psychic detectives, have any actual real world law enforcement, like police academy training? Is that what you mean? I don't know. Harry, can you answer that?
I think the way I read that was, I think she's asking if police agencies actually conduct training in psychic techniques for police officers to go out and utilize. In my agency, no, they did not. However, they did offer courses in meditation. We were given, an idea of how to meditate, because police work's kind of stressful. And so anything that you can do to sort of relieve that stress, and they were very good. Actually, it was very forward thinking at the time. They would give us courses in how to meditate and the benefits of meditating and so forth. So from that, you could progress on your own to other areas of intuition and ESP and that type of thing.
Good. So M. Johnson, don't know what your first name is, was saying that a psychic found a missing person in England recently. That was in the newspaper. So that does happen, where psychics can, and it's good that they actually admitted to that. That was admitted to in the newspapers as well. Because in the States they don't really, Harry, they don't really tend to admit that a psychic. I know there were lots of cases where Sylvia Brown supposedly worked. I actually looked up the case history of the cases she worked on. 95% of them she provided unactionable information. So just bear that in mind. What you see and what you hear on the media and TV is not necessarily the case. So it was marvelous here when this one woman was found using a psychic, and they admitted to it. So marvelous. I mean, really, we want to be doing this not for the fame or fortune. If you're doing this work for fame or fortune, really, there's easier ways. There really is. But we really want to be able to do this just for that genuine desire to be able to use your innate qualities to be able to help improve the lives of other people, because it's desperately difficult when a loved one is murdered and the criminal is not found, or when somebody goes to trial and they get off because a piece of evidence didn't stick or whatever. So you can imagine yourself, if you're in that situation, how important this work would be. And it happens all the time. Cases go cold all the time. Culprits are not found, or there are suspects, but they can't get what they need to really nail the convictions. So just bear that in mind. You can really contribute and be helpful in that area. So Johnny is asking, if you're not associated with a team, how would you have access to the case? The only way, really the other way, if you're not part of a team, or if you don't have a relationship with somebody in law enforcement or a retired law enforcement officer. I mean, the ideal thing is like somebody like Harry, who's a retired law enforcement officer who still has a lot of connections within the force. So if you came to somebody like Harry, then Harry could sort of look at it and take it to the force. And that's what Find Me do. They profile, they train, they assess psychics who are coming to them from information, so that they know who's coming to them knows what an actionable information is and has the training to be able to bring actionable information. That's the ideal thing to be able to do, is have somebody who can liaise between you and the police force. And it doesn't have to be an organization. It could be, you could get to know, go hang out at the 50th here in the Bronx, get to know somebody. I'm sure they'd be too delighted. Probably not, but you know what I mean. So a lot of the time people get information because you just see something on TV, or, Facebook. This is very common on Facebook, missing persons. This person's been missing since whatever, and this gets shared. And you can just see it, and you could sit with that photo the same way as you would sit with the photo if somebody took it. If you're if you really wanted to, you could just, whatever you got, you could call in as an anonymous tip, right, Harry? You could do that as well, would be an option if you wanted to make sure you weren't becoming a suspect.
Yeah, and if you do call in anonymously, that's certainly fine. And the police department would certainly follow up on it as far as it could go. And if that developed any kind of credible information, they may try to reach out and say, that's what Crime Stoppers was all about. Most agencies have what they call Crime Stoppers, where you can call and report things anonymously. You don't give your name, and when you speak to the police, they give you a number, and then they will broadcast out. Could be 6 weeks later. Okay, would reporter number 847 call back because we need further information, or we'd like to get in touch, or that kind of thing. So yeah, absolutely, anonymous information is always looked at.
Yeah, so that's also a very viable way to go, is to call it in that way if you just wanted to be careful, and make sure you don't get stuck on the murder board, as to say. So so that would be another thing. So yeah, so photographs on the news, we see this all the time. Somebody's gone missing, especially on local news. You'll see that on social media. Somebody's gone missing. You can sit with the photos the same way as you would do if you had, if you're working with a team, often they will tell you it's good to know the last known whereabouts, because then when you're remote viewing, you can start working within a catchment area. Although bearing in mind, people get transported, but it's always a good place to start. Sit with the photo. Do they feel alive or dead? Do you get a sense of where they may be or what's going on with them? And you can just work the photo in that way, and then work with your remote viewing, and then maybe incorporate Google Maps or whatnot to start looking for landmarks to get an idea of where they are located. And then if you wanted, just to be careful, you could wander into the precinct if you wanted to do that, or you just call the anonymous line there and deliver the information, which is a very effective way of doing it without yourself getting caught up in it too. So you could always consider that. The other thing too is then you've got to bear in mind, sometimes these cases, it can take forever before information comes back to you as well. So this is not a job for the instant gratification junkies, because these can go on for a very long time, cold cases. So when we're doing in the psychic detective courses, I've got 3 thorough cases for you to solve at the end of the course, but the information is all available in the public record so that you can actually get feedback on your work to see how it's developing. Because if you were given just a random unsolved crime, it could be 10 years or never before the answers come. So you would never be able to validate your work and your accuracy. So that's why having cases that have already been solved is a good way to do the work. All right. Did you train to attain your psych detective work? So Patricia, I did work in a number of places. So I did some training with Find Me. I also did Russell Targ's remote viewing work, and I just worked with various people over the years, and then just honed that with practical experience as well to see how it goes. You just sort of learn the skills, which is what I translated into the course. These are the skills you need, and then the rest of it just becomes your own work and your own development of your own ESP, your own abilities in that way as well. All right. Any more questions? Everyone good? Yeah. You ready to do a bit of practice? Yeah. All right. So these are just short practices. Now, like I say, if we were doing these for real, you would spend 15 minutes on each photograph at least. So when you're doing psych detective work, it's very, very tiring. So those of you who are taking my ESP course at the moment live knows this. It's very, very tiring work, right? And so what you want to be able to do is you would just work for 15-minute increments. So if somebody sent you a photograph, or if you saw a photograph on the news, or if you're working with a case, you would just look at the photograph of the person, and you would sit and you would work with it to see what is coming up for you for about 15 minutes, then take a break. Because after that, you get tired, your extrasensory perception is starting to get tired, the mind starts interfering. And as you all know, you've all heard me say this a million times, the mind, when it interferes, always tries to be helpful and never, ever is. The mind can only be relied on to make 2 and 2 make 5. Right. So we want to be able to do is do this work in short blocks of time, 15 minutes, take a break, go away, come back to it. So when I used to work with cases, I would sit for 15 minutes and then I would put it down. I might come back to it later in the day or the next day to work with it over. You really, when you get a case, you want to really try to put a decent amount of time into the first 48 hours because they are critical, but only in 15-minute blocks, because you will get tired and then the mind will get in, skew everything very quickly. Some of you have heard me tell the story of the bear. When I was working with somebody, we were doing remote viewing training, and it was many years ago, and I was living in Brooklyn at the time, and she tuned, we sat down, this is something we do in our ESP class as well, and in the psychic detective training. We sat down separately and wherever our separate cities were, and we agreed to sit at the same time and stare at something in front of us, and then both using our remote viewing and our telepathic abilities, be able to attune to what the other person was saying and then email and report back, right? And so this woman sat with me, and I was sitting like in a little green patch in Brooklyn. And she sent me an email and she says, I do believe you're in the Catskills. Right. And the reason she came up with that, which was like so far away, was because I was sitting in this little green patch where somebody had hung a brown teddy bear out of a tree. Right. It was just a little tree, a little teddy bear hanging out of it. And so she tuned to me and she saw trees and she saw bears. And so she decided, so her telepathic and her remote viewing was working really well. She saw the tree, she saw the brown bear. But then her mind came into it and thought, well, if there's a brown bear, she must be in the Catskills, the only place there's bears, right? So while her telepathy and remote viewing was marvelous, and she saw the brown bear hanging out, the mind then came in and said, oh, well, let me reason this. This must mean she's in the Catskills. Now, if you were working with a missing person who had gone missing in Brooklyn and you told law enforcement they were in the Catskills, that would be absolutely no help at all, right? So this is a really important part of this work, is being able to understand where the mind is interfering, which is why we want to work in very, very short blocks. So for today, because I just have, like I said earlier, I put together 4 little mini cases, mini works for you, because I got a bit carried away when I was putting them together. So I don't know if we'll get through all 4, but I think what we can do is we can just spend about 3 minutes on each of them. Normally you would do 15 minutes on each of them. So all I want you to do is, now don't sit there peering at it and try to look for clues. What we want to be able to do is really take a breath, move into your power and presence, moving into your, setting your intention that you want to receive information using your extrasensory perception. And what we're going to do is we are going to work with 4 mini little exercises. The first one is just to get a sense of whether somebody is alive or dead. And then the second exercise will be whether somebody is innocent or guilty. The innocent or guilty becomes part of profiling when you're starting to work with perpetrators. All right, so these are just little mini exercises just for some fun. As I said, as much fun as you can have trying to determine if somebody is alive or dead or guilty or innocent, but we'll give it a go. All right, you all ready? Yeah. So I'm just going to show you a photograph. Now, the thing to do, I do talk about this a lot more in training, but just for today, just for a little bit, so we can have a little sense of it and a little interactivity. I want you to just sit. Don't be peering. Just feel the energy of this picture I'm about to show you. Just feel the energy of it. You could even just look at it and close your eyes and feel into it. You don't have to stare at it all the time. We don't want to do what's called cold reading, which is just looking for actual clues. With our heads, we really want to use a sense of clairsentience or resonance to get an impression from this. So I'm just going to, we'll just have about 4 of these all together. So we'll just sit with them. And let me just share a portion of the screen here. So we have this lady first. So just taking a breath, getting yourself present, moving out of the head, and just setting your intention now to receive information. Can you tell me if you get a sense of this, if this woman is currently alive or dead? Don't overthink it. If you find you're going into your mind, take a breath, shake it off, move back into your intuitive or your clairsentient senses. Really, what you want to do is really focus on breathing this into your heart space. Drop your awareness of your breath to your heart. Breathe in and out of your heart will help keep you out of your head. Sometimes what can help is as you just feel the energy of the picture, does the energy feel like it's moving, or does it feel static, or do you feel there's a light in her eyes even though it's quite a small photo? Do you feel a light in the eyes, or the eyes dull? These things can offer you a sense of whether the person's alive or not. Okay, how did you get on? Do you feel that she's alive? And just bear in mind, if we're working with law enforcement, they just want to know, is she alive or dead? So thumbs up, who thinks she's alive? Only one person thinks she's alive. Everybody else thinks she's dead? She's actually alive. This is Billy Lesra. This is an interesting story. I'll send you this PDF with the recording later. Her stories, I'll put a link into the story. That woman, actually, there was another woman standing on that cliff, about to jump off the cliff, wanted to die by suicide. And this woman, Billy, came along and asked her to take a photograph of her. And when the woman who was going to jump had to stop to take the photograph of her, she somehow, in the engagement, changed her mind and ended up not jumping. Isn't that a marvelous story? Yep. So Billy there is alive. All right, you ready for another one? So the good thing about this, what you want to be able to do, as I mentioned, is just feel the energy as you sort of just breathe the photograph into your being. If you find you're sort of breathing in up here, can you all just take a breath into your head? Just feel how it feels. Bring your awareness to your forehead and breathe. Right? Now bring your awareness to your heart and breathe with your awareness on your heart. Can you feel a difference? Everyone feel a bit of a difference. So what you want to do is, if you find your awareness up here, drop it, use the breath to bring your awareness down to your heart. It'll get you out of your head. All right? Good. So just feel, is the energy moving? Do you feel that? I mean, obviously there's a photograph. The photo's not moving, but do you feel the energy's moving? These are normally, if you got a photograph of somebody's alive or dead, you'd probably get a much closer shot, so you can get a clearer shot of their eyes, but not always. But you can sort of look to the eyes. I often find, for me, I find if the person is dead, and when I say dead, I mean physically dead. I don't mean eternally dead, because we know that's a different thing altogether. But physically dead, I often find that the eyes feel flat to me, and if they're alive, the eyes feel animated, even though it's a photograph. That's just because you're feeling the energy, but it's different for everybody, right? All right, you ready for another one? Yeah. All right, here we go. That's a tricky one because you can't really see her face. Okay. What's the verdict? Alive or dead? Alive or dead? I'll put it in the chat. And Anya, dead. Judy, dead. Everybody thinks she's dead. Everyone feels she's dead, I should say. Oh, a few people, one or two people alive. Most people are dead. Yes, she is indeed dead. And I have her story here, and there's a link to her story there as well. She actually, not this photograph, but she actually stood on the edge of a cliff to take a selfie and fell off, which is a big problem. And there's a link to it there if you want to read the whole story. That's why you need to be really careful about where you're taking selfies. I just want to go back to a previous, Denise, you had mentioned that on the previous one, I believe, you were saying clairaudience, you heard she was alive, but then felt a shadow, so went with transitioned. So this is one thing, it's a good point. I want to point out this, the more you work with these, the more you'll start to understand your own pattern, you know. So it could be that in like Denise's case, where every time you hear something, you may feel something different. And then over time, you do 100 of these, you know, anytime the majority of cases where you hear it is correct, when you feel it is wrong, then you know in something like this to trust your clairaudience, right? Somebody else might feel or see something and you know, the only real way to really master this is just to do lots and lots and lots of it, to start to see in short blocks, to see what your pattern is. Because like I said earlier, I normally will get a sense of a lot of energy behind somebody's eyes if they're alive, and they feel very flat if they're not. But other people feel that the other way around. So the only real way to know how your ESP is working for you is to do lots and lots of these, which is why in the training, there's loads and loads of these. But you could also just get your buddy to send you a bunch of photographs to sit with, and work at them as well if you wanted to do that. The link to her story is there. I'll send this to you in the PDF as well. And Bernadette, you asked a question. Will you remind me to answer that at the end, please, as well? Because you sent it to me. If you wouldn't mind popping that back into everybody, send it to everybody if you would. I'll just make sure that I'll make sure that I answer it. So, M. Johnson, yeah, people are getting a sense that she fell, but I just want to be mindful. Just be aware, like, were you feeling she fell here in this photograph? Because she didn't fall here in this photograph. She fell somewhere else. So you just want to be careful that logic is not, the mind is not trying to come in together. Well, that looks a bit precarious. I'm going to say she's dead, right? Because that's the mind. All right. So just be mindful of the mind. Okay. All right. Two more. We're going to do innocent or guilty. Yeah. We don't have to do elaborate profiling. We'll just do it because we don't have time. But just let me get a sense of innocent or guilty. And if you get a sense of what, if they're guilty, what the crime is, you can, right? But really, we're just focused on innocent or guilty here. All right. This guy. Okay. So we've got quite a few people thinking he's guilty, a few people thinking he's innocent, was a victim, innocent. So we're definitely split 50-50, innocent or guilty. He does look like an innocent enough chap, doesn't he? But he's guilty. So that's what he's guilty of. There's a link there. He's on the FBI's most wanted list currently. That's another thing, another resource if you wanted to work with. The FBI's most wanted list, they publish online all the photographs people are after with the cases. So that's another thing you could also work with if you wanted to, is to sit with some of the FBI's most wanted criminals to work with those. One more? You've had enough? Do one more? One more, okay. Innocent or guilty guy? Okay, Julia. It's our last one anyway. Okay. Everybody seems to be unanimously going for innocent, even though he's in the jailhouse. Everyone's going innocent, wrongfully committed. Wrongfully convicted, I should say. Why is that? Is it because the last one he was guilty, you thought this one must be innocent? I could trick you, you know. I thought it was a school. It's actually prison, but he is indeed innocent and was wrongfully convicted. So well done, everyone. He was in jail for 44 years, wrongfully convicted of raping a white woman in North Carolina. Just settled a few months ago, this year sometime, for 25 million, released, exonerated. There's a link to his whole story there if you're interested. So well done, everybody. You did pretty well. Did pretty well, huh? So if anybody wants to do the full training on the Psych Detective course, which Harry has actually done and endorsed, which I am very happy to hear. So that was great validation from right out of the horse's mouth. For all of you who have done this, come today. There's $75 off, which is good until tomorrow night, right? Until midnight tomorrow. So if you want to do the course, check it out. If you start and you hate it and you go, this is not for me, you can pop off after. You can drop out after 3 days. 3 days to try it out. But it's a good course. It's based on years and years of training that I've had and years of experience and all of the work that I've actually put into it. So I don't have. I should have pulled up a picture of this on the website as well if you want. But it is It's got actual video teachings. It's got loads of interactive elements. It's got teaching on remote viewing. It's quite intensive, Harry, right? Harry's done it.
Yeah, I was really impressed. I really didn't know what to expect when I got into it, but yeah, I was very impressed. And one of the things I really liked about it was that, you know, you start getting into some nuts and bolts activities right from the start. You know, it's like when police officers in the academy and they go to the range, everybody wants to start shooting guns, you know, the first day, but you get this, you know, 2-day course of what size bullets go in what kind of gun. Nobody wants to hear that. They want to go out and start shooting, and you let people shoot right from the get-go. And that was one of the things that I was very impressed with.
Proverbial shooting.
Proverbial shooting, precisely, yes.
Yeah, so we have lots and lots of practice. So like I said, the only real way to master the art of if somebody is alive or dead or innocent or guilty or profiling remote viewing is just to do it over and over and over and over again to establish your pattern, how your ESP is working for you. So the more of these you can do, the better. So there's lots of these interactive elements in the course as well to help you. You can also just get, like I said, get your buddies to send you a bunch of photographs. Although make sure they know if the person's alive or dead, because I did this years ago with a friend of mine. Said, send me this. She sent me a bunch of photographs. I did all the lives or deads, and she hadn't actually recorded any of it, so she didn't know who was alive or dead. So make sure you get a more reliable friend than mine. So do that. So that's that. And then one question. Oh, so Laura, you did the course as well. Oh, you did the course live. Yeah, well, this is probably more detail, and you get more time with it because it's on your own time than the live course you'd like today, 5 minutes. So you get more time to actually work with it. So I think it's actually more thorough. Joe, difference between gold and premium is lifetime. So if you buy the premium, you have it for your lifetime, and the gold is like cheaper. It's like it renews every year if you want to, if you want to just do it for the year and not have to pay as much money. So one is a subscription, one is a lifetime buy. And then Bernadette asked me a question. Now it's disappeared, but it was a very good question. Oh yeah, so Bernadette, you took the psych detective course and thought it was great in capitals. Thank you. Glad to hear it. But it's heavy. Yes, it is. And what do I recommend in between cases to regain your balance? So I would say, and I do talk about this as well, it is very important when you're doing this work that you shake it off, right? And the best way to shake that off is to go play with your cat, have a shower, eat something, move very, very much back into your normal physical senses, you know, do things that are sensory in the physical world, take a walk, but not to, you know, don't be sort of trying to balance your chakras. That just keeps you in that sort of energetic space. Do a few stretches, some yoga, some sort of deep breathing, exhale it out, eat, drink, shower, walk, do things that are very, very physical, bring you right back into this space. And you just want to constantly just sort of shake it all off, shake it out, breathe it out when you're done, because can be quite heavy work. Dealing with the terrible, horrible things people have done to each other can be very, very heavy work, very rewarding work, desperately needed work, but also self-care is very important. So I do talk about self-care a lot in the training too. It is a key aspect of it, but in brief, these are the sorts of things you want to be able to do. All right. Anybody else? Any final questions? Yeah, Lisa, nobody is right 100% of the time. What we want to be able to do is somewhere around 70%, 50-50 is chance, right? So we really want to, but the thing is not to focus on the stats, is to focus on your own ESP, your extrasensory perception, your clairsentience, and just focus there on how that's working for you. Let the stats go. We really want to, it needs to be arising from within. Does that make sense? Lisa? Yeah, okay, good. Would this course tie in with all the psychic medium genealogy work? Well, Patricia, or is Eternal Bonds better? It really depends, Patricia, wherever you are, on what it is you're trying to do. If you are interested in using ESP to help solve crimes and mysteries, this is definitely the way to go. If you are interested in maintaining relationships with your own loved ones in the spirit world, you would want to do Eternal Bonds, because that's a nice, very personal, intuitive sort of course. But that's the objective, is just to maintain relationships with your own loved ones. The objective of this course and this course ties in very closely with the ESP course that we're currently doing live, which is just developing your extrasensory perception and using them to this end. Trish, can't speak to genealogy. I don't deal with genealogy at all. So unless you're dealing with ancestors, lifetime membership. No, because new cases, we do live meetings every month. So there's always time for to ask questions if you're doing the course. The live meetings are always on different subjects. We usually leave time at the end for anybody who's got questions about another masterclass. I don't keep updating the cases because that just wouldn't be feasible for me to do. There are 3 cases there, but once you've gone through the program and done those 3 cases, you should be equipped and skilled to now start working on live cases yourself. If that makes sense. All right. Who else asked me that? Bernadette. All right. So if nobody's any more, that's it. So thank you all for showing up, being willing to delve into the underbelly of humankind to do this work. It is very heavy, can get dark, but incredibly beneficial and incredibly helpful, and definitely needed for people who are really suffering, you know. So thank you, everyone. We'll get you the recording. I'll send you the PDF as well, so you can get the links to the cases we looked at if you want to have a bit more of a read. And we will be in touch for next month, Spirit Space Gathering, closer to the date. All right, take care.
Karen, thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, I had a great time. Thanks so much for having me. Bye now.
Bye-bye.